This is a test about paint lifting. I want to test out different type of paint, how easy they are to be lifted or how difficult they are to be lifted. If you, like me, run into some problems with paint lifting, this video is for you. Either you are using gouache, you want to figure out if there's a way to prevent the background color to be lifted, or you're using watercolor, you want to lift up the paint to create the sun ray effect. This is for people like me run into a problem about paint being lifted or not lifted. I had both problems before. There are times I want the background to stay put, not to be lifted. And there are times I want to lift up the paint because I made a mistake and I couldn't lift up the paint. So these issues are caused by the paint itself and also the paper. I think this is a very common problem for people who paint gouache. Like the background just so easy to be lifted, and I have a few times that I was accidentally drop water on top of my background or my painting. That's it. The paint just dissolved in the water, and I either have to make it a moon or trying to paint over. It got me really frustrated, and I really want to find something that is, even I accidentally drop some water, it will be okay. I want to have the feeling like paint at ease. And with gouache, I really feel it's very stressful in a way. I really want to have the carefree time when I was painting. So this is something I desperately want to solve. So I'm doing this test, and I hope this will benefit other people to able to find this solution and able to paint carefree. And feeling free to paint. That is so important. The spirit and everything we have with our energy, with our emotion, it all go into the painting. Trust me, they do. In this test, I use two different type of papers. One is 100% cellulose. The other one is 100% cotton. I also want to take this opportunity to test out different paint. So I have 3 different brands of gouache and 3 different brands of watercolor. So first is Pebble. That's a brand from France. This one is Middle Cadmium Yellow. And the next one is Winsor Newton's Permanent Green Middle. And the third one is Renaissance cover range of gouache. This is a paint made in Poland, and it's very interesting. The consistency between Pebble and Winsor Newton's gouache, they are quite different. Winsor Newton's gouache is much thinner, easier to spray and easy to apply. You don't need to put a lot of water. A lot of people just paint straight from the tube without any problem. But Pebble is different. It's much thicker. You need some water to make it creamy, to make it easy to apply. That's the biggest difference. It's so thick, when you apply straight from the tube, it will have the streak on the cold press paper. If people are used to use the consistency like Winsor Newton, they will find Pebble a little bit difficult to work with. So it's all about the habit and then what you get used to it. If you really like the paint, you will spend more time using it and you'll get used to it. You know how to use it. How much water you need and the consistency you like, it's all through practice and use a lot of the paint. I do feel Winsor Newton's gouache is more beginner friendly because you can apply this straight away, and also you can add a little bit water to make it thinner. So it's easier to gauge the consistency. With some other brands, their gouache is thicker, and it will be a little bit more difficult for beginners to understand how much water should be added. And like me, I have experimented a lot to get to know how much water I need to put in Pebble's paint and how much water I need to put into Winsor Newton paint. They are different, but the more you paint, the more you understand them. So don't worry too much about it, just go on and play. The paper I'm using here are 2 different types of paper. One is from Clairefontaine. It is 100% cellulose paper. The other one is 100% cotton from Bahong. I believe this is college grade, cold pressed. Okay, so you can see this table over here. It's exactly the same table. So let's look at the first column. There's no water added, straight from the tube. I just paint on straight out of the tube. The second column is I add some water in it to thin down the paint. Once the paint has added water, it's thinned down a bit, and that would make paint easier to stay put. The thicker the paint, the easier to be lifted off. And the third one is I'm experimenting a very interesting medium. It's called Aquafix by Schminke. I don't know if I pronounced the name right or wrong, but that's what I heard what people say. It doesn't matter. It's a German brand, so it has a German name. And so this Aquafix is very interesting. Just a few drops, I can make the paint stay put and doesn't come off. And I want to see also the consistency, how much I put into the paint to have the non-lifting effect. So that's the third and fourth column. The first one is just 1 drop, and the last column has 2 drops. So that's total 3 drops. A little goes a long way. So the third gouache is from Renaissance, and it's made in Poland. And this one is a gift from my partner when he came back from abroad, and he bought from the art shop, which is collaboration with the university, so they bought in bulk. They do not have the tubes from Renaissance, and then he got the containers that is repackaging from the art shop, but actually it's Renaissance cover range of gouache. I put it into a squeeze bottle for me to easy to squeeze out the paint. The consistency of this gouache paint, Renaissance cover, is more like the Winsor Newton side. It's not so thick like Pebeo, which means you can paint straight out of the tube. You can add a little bit of water to have the coffee cream consistency, and that would be much easier to spread. I like Renaissance cover gouache. They have their own special binder. I went on their website to look it up. They use a special binder, their own binder. It's kind of vegetable resin, and it just really helped the paint to stay put. And it actually would make the paint waterproof after you dry. And that's such a good news to me. So I have been using it, and I have been testing it. Some color, you can still lift a little bit, just tiny little, but most of them, they stay put. Once it dry, and that is something fantastic for using for the background or on the painting. This is just a note to show you with Baohong paper, what are the differences on the surface between the college grade and artist grade or master grade cold press paper. I have both of them, and I do find the artist grade, they are rougher. The cold press is rougher, and the college grade is smoother. And I do prefer the smoother part. I do feel they perform differently as well. I do find artist grade blend better. I think just because the texture is rougher. Next, we are going to do watercolors. And this one is from Core, Ultramarine Pink, and it's a non-staining paint. And this one is Quinacridone Gold from Core. It's a staining paint. This paint is actually discontinued. I bought it just because I love the color. And also the one before, Ultramarine Pink, is also discontinued. And I happened to find a video which is very interesting, talk about why watercolor or gouache pigment or any painting pigment discontinued. It's linked to car industry. Can you believe that? With art supply, with pigments. It's apparently because car paint dominates the whole pigment industry. So if they have stopped produce some pigment for the car, we won't have it for our paint also. I will leave the link in the description if you're interested about the story. I find it fascinating. And the watercolor also, I divided every brand. I use both staining and non-staining colors to test out their lifting quality. I use Core, both staining and non-staining. Of course, watercolor, most of them are staining. It's interesting with Core paint, when I look into the paint chart, I figure most of the paint are staining. And it was not easy to find a non-staining paint, but I managed it. So I have these 2 colors. And the second one is Memory Blue. That's an Italian brand. I also found both staining and non-staining paint. And the last one is Winsor Newton Professional Range. It's also very interesting when I look at to their paint chart in details. Most of the paints from Winsor Newton, many of them are non-staining. Apart from the Renaissance, the blue one, the rest of the paint I bought locally. We have 4 or 5 or even more art shops in Malta. I firmly believe to support local business because once you need something urgently, the shop is always there for you. But if you don't support them now and they disappear one day, then you always have to depend on online delivery. And I just feel only if we help each other to thrive, we will thrive as well. Okay, so this is just the paint and paper. And everybody does their own test differently. This is how I do it. I test both gouache and watercolor. And because they are different, but they both are water-based medium. The biggest difference between watercolor and gouache is the amount of pigment and binder. Watercolor has less pigment and more binder. And gouache is the other way around, has more pigment and less binder. So you imagine this binder is a glue to glue the paint together. So you have less glue. That means it's easier, the paint will come off. So gouache paint is very easy to be lifted off. Watercolor is less. So 15 minutes has passed. So I'm going to do the lifting test for the gouache paints. The first one is Pebbles gouache, and there's no doubt just very easy to be lifted, just one pass and very gentle pass. There's a good amount of water on my brush. And then the second one, which is very easy to be lifted as well. The third one is with some Aquafix. So you can see there is no paint lifted. And the fourth one has more Aquafix, and again the paint hasn't been lifted, which is very good. And I do exactly the same thing with the 100% cotton paper. So the first two, just straight from the tube, the pigment can be lifted. And the second one, add a little bit water also. The paint can be lifted easily. And the third column with a little bit of Aquafix, and there's no pigment lifted. And the fourth one is the same. There's no pigment lifted. So I carry on to do the lifting test with Winsor Newton's permanent green. And as expected, the gouache is very easy to be lifted. And the second one with a little bit of water, also the pigment is easily lifted. And the third column, it's with a little bit of Aquafix. The fourth one, you can see the pigment is stayed and not been lifted. So the third gouache is from Renaissance cover. And I did the test, and when I was doing the test with more Aquafix, that one actually, the paint has been lifted. It's entirely a human error because I most probably put a lot of paint on it and it's still not dry yet. When I have more Aquafix, I most probably mix more paint with it as well. But basically, I would just ignore it. And just a reminder, have to mix the paint really well with Aquafix. I also have to wait for the paint completely dry. Okay, so there's also a test about the timing. So when do I lift up the paint? So I have this test. After 15 minutes, I use a damp brush to lift up the paint. And there's a 30-minute mark as well. And then I add another one later on for 24 hours mark. Because there are a lot of people say, oh, you have to wait for 24 hours or 48 hours before you do another layer. So I want to see if that is true. I mean, this is only one layer. There are people who does glazing for multiple layers. They might say it's better to wait for 1 or 2 days later if you want the paint completely dry. So you can do another layer without worrying lift up the paint to wait for 24 hours or 48 hours. I think that is very long, and it depends on the climate as well. If you live in Asia where it's very humid, maybe you need more time to let the paint dry. So it depends on your weather season. You might need different amount of time to wait for the paint to dry. So this is just about if I wait 15 minutes, 30 minutes, or 24 hours are different. And I found that there's not much different when there's no added medium. And with watercolor, yes, Some do have a little bit of difference. So you can continue to see the test result.
Another thing I also think is very important is how much amount of water on the brush. I'm going to show you the amount of water. If I just dip in the water and I just go there, you see there's a lot of water. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wipe off the water on the rim. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so that would be the amount of water on the brush. Okay, so that's something I'm going to try. When I try to lift, I will have more water on the brush. For example, I will maybe just do 2, like this. That's the water amount I'm going to use for lifting the color. And this one is for mixing the color, okay? 5 times. I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like this. Just that amount of water.
You can see Aquafix perform really, really well after 15 minutes. I won't be able to lift any paint anymore. And this one, because the paint is thick and it wasn't dry yet after 15 minutes, so obviously I could still lift off the paint. You can see on the 30-minute mark, when it's completely dry, I wasn't able to lift off any paint. So you can see these staining and non-staining paint performance. There are not much difference with the papers. The performance is very similar on these 2 different types of paper. And with the paint, there's no difference on gouache. The colors all look the same, but there is a little difference with watercolor. You can see on the 100% cotton paper is a little bit more vibrant. For the lifting, for the color lifting effect, it's all similar. With the cotton paper, it's all very smooth transitions. With cellulose paper, it's all uneven. So it really depends on the effect you're trying to create. If you want something a little bit uneven-ish, you go for the cellulose paper. But if you are looking for a very smooth transition, go for the 100% cotton paper. And with the staining and non-staining watercolor, this is pretty much the same. They don't have much difference. But you can see this one is staining. I could lift less of the pigment, but this one is non-staining. It's performed really well as well. It's not been lifted much. This one is staining. I could lift less of the pigment, but this one is non-staining. It's performed really well as well. I can only lift a little bit. So I do not see the difference between staining and non-staining paint with the paint lifting. So generally, with these 3 gouache paints, as I mentioned, the consistency difference. With Winsor Newton's gouache, you can use it straight out of the tube. It's easy to spread, no problem at all. But with Pebeo, you will need to add a little bit of water to mix to have a better smooth consistency. Otherwise, I will find the resistance to put on the paint. And with Renaissance cover, the consistency is similar to Winsor Newton and not as opaque as the other 2 gouache. So tomorrow I will do a 24-hour test, the watercolor, to see if I can lift the same amount of paint or less of the paint. So let's see how it goes tomorrow. So there's another thing I found with Aquafix. You see I'm tilted a little bit so you can actually see this glossy, a little bit shine on some of the paint with Aquafix. And the ones with 3 drops of Aquafix, you can see more obvious, especially with the core, Quinacridone Gold, and the Winsor Newton's Winsor Violet. These 2 become shiny, like a glossy surface after adding Aquafix. And it's only on the cellulose paper. It doesn't happen on the 100% cotton paper, cold pressed paper. I imagine because of the texture, so I don't see there's any glossy shine. So this is something to be aware of if you worry about the surface supposed to be matte, become glossy. And glossy is not even as well. Like you can see some part is shinier, more glossier than the other side. So this is something to keep in mind. I personally don't mind this because most probably I will varnish it in a glossy finish and want it to look more like an oil painting. On Aquafix, the bottle, I do not find there's any information about the ingredients. So we don't know what is inside in Aquafix. And it could be anything. It could be acrylic, it could be casing, I don't know. But I don't care so much. I care more about the result and the effect I'm trying to achieve rather than just very focused on what is ingredient. I think being an artist, it has to be open-minded, and I do see people are very focused on like watercolor being watercolor, gouache being gouache. But I like mixed media as long as there's the purpose. I think the concept of the painting is the most important thing to achieve the goal, the result I want. And I do not worry so much about what material I use. Will it become not pure watercolor or pure gouache? This is something I do not care so much about. And 100 years ago, people already do it. Like they use a lot of mixed medium to achieve the result they want, instead of just very focused on what material they use. Okay, so this is just something we should feel free to explore. As long as it does the purpose, it really helps you to achieve the masterpiece in your mind. That is the most important thing. If you do worry about the shine, the alternative is to use other type of medium, other type of paint to do your background to prevent the lifting. Or just use 100% cotton paper. Explore different type of paper. So this test I'm going to do after 24 hours. And those ones which already passed 15 minutes or 30-minute marks, I will not do them again because they already passed the test. And I don't find there's much difference on gouache paint, but with watercolor, yes, 24 hours does make a little difference. So this is just saying, like, if you're doing glazing, you're applying multiple layers, yes, do wait for 24 hours or 48 hours. It will help you not to lift off the paint underneath. I will put this test result in a PDF file so you can download it if you want. I will leave the link in the description. And I hope you enjoy this test. This is something I enjoy doing because I love experiment with different medium, different paint, and different techniques. And I love sharing the results. If you find this helpful, please give it a thumbs up. I have some paintings and prints you can find on my online shop. And thank you for your support, and I'll talk to you in the next video.